Welcome, everybody. Today, our topic is From High School to Higher Ed, the executive function skills your college freshman needs for success. I'm so excited that you're here with me today. My name is Dolin, and I will be your host. For the last 25 years, my team of tutors, executive function coaches, and college consultants have been helping kids to do better in school. But when it comes to the topic of executive functions, not just your freshman year of college, but after that, your sophomore, junior, and senior years, there's nobody better to discuss this topic than Suzan Watkinson. Suzan, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here with me today.
Thank you for having me, Ann.
Suzan is an executive function coach here with us at Educational Connection, and she is amazing, if I may say so. I'm going to talk a little bit more about her work in just a moment, but she has 26 years of classroom experience. She has a master's degree in human services counseling, and she is a certified child life specialist. So, Suzan, when it comes to that transition from high school to college, you've worked with lots of kids that are making this transition. This is your expertise. What are some common issues that freshmen face?
I think the most common issue that I've seen with the freshmen I've worked with is that they have never encountered the college syllabus. And even if they have been academically gifted through school, they are now entering an arena where they're showing up at classes that they have to usually walk to. They have to purchase their own books, and they have to make sure that they meet all the deadlines that are on their schedule for usually about 5 classes. And it's a system that they're not familiar with. And if they get behind a little bit, it tends to snowball and get them behind a lot. So the thing we start with is, what are the first steps they have to do to prepare before they ever show up at campus?
Now, that makes sense because we kind of assume that kids will naturally know how to do these things, but they don't. And I worked with a lot of kids myself that, they get this syllabus and they're like, okay, this is great. And they kind of tuck it away, but they don't take time initially to say, okay, these are my big due dates. Let me put them on my calendar and then let me plan ahead for these things.
Exactly, because they are not familiar with knowing. Even if you say, did you read the syllabus? They might say, sure, Susan, I read the syllabus. But what does that mean? Does that mean that they ordered the books? Does that mean that they looked at the deadlines? Did they look at what the drop policy is? Do they know what the criteria is? If something is turned in late, will the professor take it up to 3 days late? Will they only do it once? Like all those details. And they have to do that for 5 classes. So they need to know what they're reading, not just read it.
Yes, that's such a great point. I remember, over the years, like many, many years, we've gotten calls from parents asking for help for their college freshmen. And we kind of never did that. We really stopped with kids their senior year, but it became really personal for me when my older son went off to college, and he's 25 now, and he has ADHD. And I knew that it might be difficult for him. And because we didn't provide the service, I hired somebody else to help him. And it was okay, but not great. It didn't end up being that successful because it was very transactional. It was more like, okay, did you turn this in? Did you study for that? And I found that they didn't really have a relationship. And it seems that that is key for students that are making this transition, that they really have to feel that the person they're working with has a relationship. And so I'll talk more about, fast forward how we change things. But we do now offer the service because we saw that there was certainly a need for it. And it really starts with building a foundation of trust and respect. Can you talk a little bit about that, Suzan?
Yes. So when students go off to college, usually whoever they interact with for their first 2 weeks, that becomes their unit that they spend the next 4 years with. Now, that's not an always rule, but that's a generality. So we want to be there right at the beginning as a trusted partner with them. It's great when parents can do it, but sometimes the students are like, no, I don't want my parents involved because I'm off to college. So building that trusting relationship as the tutor who's going to come alongside them and help them allows people like me to see what's going on in a more global sense. And I can see like what is their sleep cycle? What is their eating cycle? Who are their friends? What are they doing at night and on weekends? What does their schedule look like in addition to their classwork and how they're doing academically? And so it becomes more of a full picture. But in order for students to really be able to give that picture to their tutor, they really need to trust their tutor, and that their tutor is going to have their best interests and genuinely care for them. And really, for me, my biggest thing is seeing each student as an individual and seeing their potential and helping them genuinely reach that potential, knowing that there's going to be struggles along the way, but I'm not going to give up on them. And it helps them to not give up on the relationship and to really work hard for themselves because they know someone believes in them.
And I can attest to that because Suzan has worked with my younger son, and it's been a phenomenal relationship. And I think what's so great about the service, and I know you mentioned tutor, but we use the words kind of tutor and executive function coach interchangeably, is that you've really helped him think big and think like, oh, I'm capable of more. And when he struggled with motivation, helping him to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and having you by his side has been extremely powerful. And you just reported last year, it was his best year ever since his freshman year of high school. So seeing him on the upward trajectory is like so rewarding.
And you know what makes the biggest difference is they have to figure out what their calling is in life. And they don't always know that as an 18-year-old freshman. And somewhere along the lines, they take all these classes that they had never had in high school, and they explore different majors, and they figure out where they want to wake up and do that work. Like, it's not just that they're good at something, they have to really enjoy doing it. I don't like to say love, because no one loves 100% of what they do, but it has to be something that energizes you and that makes you feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so it takes a little time for that to shake down for most of the students and figure out, where am I supposed to be and what am I good at but not going to pursue academically for a career. And I think that's what you speak to with even your own son that I was working with, because figuring out what they're going to do as they go through college to find a vocation or to go on to a graduate program is really actually very important to their long-term happiness in their job.
Yes, for sure, Suzan. So we kind of talked globally, like an executive function coach is somebody who can help with these skills, but also is kind of like the cheerleader on the sidelines, really encouraging and supporting. But when it gets down to the nitty gritty of how executive function coaching works, can you kind of give us a broad picture and an outline of what the sessions look like?
Yes. So in the beginning of each semester, what I generally do is figure out where the students' classes are. And we take like an Excel spreadsheet and put it in there so we know like what their timing is. And then we talk about things like, what time are they planning on getting up in the morning? Do they plan on eating before they go to their first class? If they're not, what are they doing? Do they have snacks in their bag? Do they have all the things they need? Do they have their water in their computer? Do they have a spot that it's supposed to be? So like getting them ready for walking out the door in the morning is one of the biggest key things. Like, what will they need for each day? And then we look at all the spaces in between those classes and determine, is this a student that goes back to their dorm room, or are they a commuting student, or a student that when they get to the place that they are on campus, they're not going to go back to their dorm. So they need to be able to figure out, where am I going to go in those in between times, and what am I going to be doing so I don't waste that time? Because I would say one of the big things I see is that the students waste that time in between. They're like, I only have an hour, I'm just going to chat with my friends. Well, that's great, except for if you could get an hour's worth of your reading done for one of your classes, wouldn't that be better? And then you have more time at night to do those social activities.
Yeah, and I bet that's motivating to like really look at your schedule as a whole, fill in those gaps. We kind of call them weird windows sometimes. Yes. And then you have more free time on the other
end. It's amazing. It builds in when you do this and you look at the student schedule, and sometimes we even color code it so they can see which classes they have. And then we designate, okay, Wednesdays from 10:45 to 11:45, you're going to work on this subject because you have this gap in time. Then what happens is at night, they can do their extracurricular activities. They can join the student government. They can go to a religious organization or a sorority, whatever their fraternity thing. Also, if they have a test or a quiz or a paper coming up, they have free time at night already ready for them that they can devote the extra time to doing what they need to do for the next day or for that week, because their regular coursework is already done.
I love that, Susan. There's also technique to organizing materials. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So organizing materials for college students looks a little differently than what it does from years ago, because so much is digital. Some of the students, all their books are digital. Some of them have physical copies. So we need to make sure that they have what they need to take with them for their classes. But a lot of students, if they're an architecture major or a computer science major, they might have to have special things added to their computer in order to effectively do the coursework for that class. And sometimes it's a multi-step process and it's not intuitive. And they actually need to learn how to get office hours for their professor or a TA to figure out how to get what they need onto their computer so that they can do the projects required. And so we need to help them figure out, how do you get office hours? Is it in person or online? Do you need to make an appointment? Let's think ahead. What do you need? Are you going to need a special thing on your computer? So many of our students go to their classes and want to take notes on their computer when they might actually do better taking notes in an actual binder. It depends on how a person functions. Some people function better by using their hand. It goes to their brain differently. I know for my son, who is currently in a PhD program, he went and bought an iPad and the Apple, I don't know what it's called, the Apple Pencil, and he wants it on the computer, but he must write it with his hand or it won't get into his brain. And so he figured out a system for him. So like what we do is figure out what is the best system for that student so that the material goes from what they're hearing into whatever system they're taking notes and sticks in their brain so that they can go back and then restudy it. And then we also work on what does that look like when they go to study it. So organizing materials goes everything from how are they taking notes, how are they studying, how are they preparing for each day, how are they getting into office hours, and then let's add on something else that's super simple, but it gets missed. Do you have the charger for your laptop, and is it charged? Did you charge it at night? Because going into the class and having your laptop die on you doesn't help you, and it does create a panic in students.
I love you shared this with me before, best friends. Like your laptop has a best friend.
Yes.
Your charger has a best friend.
Yes. I always say that your planner, I'm a really big fan of having written planners, because putting that with your pencil or pen into a planner and physically looking at it and having it not being digital, I think is super helpful for most kids. Now, there's some that do better with digital. So, and sometimes you do both, so you can set yourself alarms. But I tell all of my students that the planner has separation anxiety and must be with the laptop at all times. So wherever their laptop is, their planner's right there, so that the two don't get displaced. They're together at all times.
They're best friends. I love that. All right. What about organizing time? You touched on this just a moment ago, really that concept of weird windows, finding those gaps and really putting it in the calendar. You talked about kids using a physical planner and then having maybe a Google Calendar too. How do you help them to find those spaces, and do they actually put it in their calendar? Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, so if I'm making an Excel spreadsheet that has the students' classes, I will then have them help me identify those and extra windows of time, and then determine what subject they're going to work on during that time and the location where they're going to go. Are they going to the library? Are they going to the dining hall? Dining hall is a great place with kids who have these dining plans. There's tables with booths where they can plug their computer in and they can sit there for 2 hours and knock out a whole lot of work and be distracted by only food as opposed to people. And so what we do is we organize their time and we have them choose what they're going to work on during that period of time. Now, another part of organizing time is looking, again, checking with the syllabus and what the class is and determining we know when the finals are. When they start in August, their finals are usually in the beginning of December. But what is due before fall break? Because most kids have a fall break. So between now and October, or between October and Thanksgiving break or Thanksgiving and finals. Or if you're doing spring semester, it would be between spring break and then maybe an Easter break or something. You go to a smaller chunk of time, like the first 8 weeks up to midterms, and then you figure out what is due. And then you figure out what is due this week. And so it's like figuring out the bigger things, the halfway bigger things, and then working your way backwards. So I call it looking ahead and planning backwards.
I like that. It's a little bit more approachable than thinking, oh, I've got this final exam or this midterm, but really thinking of your semester in smaller chunks is more doable for kids.
Exactly. So you take the 16 weeks or the 15 weeks plus finals week, you break it in half, and you're looking at the first 8 weeks up through midterms and potentially some sort of break, fall break or spring break or something. And then what you do is you then go back even further to 4 weeks, and then you go to this week. And so they know, they have it planned in what their work is to do for the week, but then they know what's due this week, what's due next week, what's due before my big break coming up, as opposed to what's due 4 months from now, because that can feel so far away.
Yeah, for sure. Let's switch gears a little bit, Susan, to effective ways to study. It seems like kids, they've learned to some degree how to study in high school, but some of those methods don't always work in college. Can you talk about study habits?
Yes. So one of the things that I like to encourage students to do is if they need the physical copy of the book, then they should get the physical copy of the book. And I'm a big proponent of this yellow highlighter. It's literally one of my most favorite tools in the whole wide world, because when students can read and highlight, then when they go back to study for an exam, they're rereading the highlights, and it helps them stick it in their brain. Same thing works for the students' notes. They can highlight their own notes. I also encourage students to do group study, especially if it's for a foreign language, or if they're in a lab, or if they have something where the group is studying together, to reach out, get people's phone numbers, get into a group chat, and find designated times to meet and study as a group. It's very, very helpful. And it also allows the student a fallback if they were to get sick, that they could reach out to that group of people and ask for help if they missed a class or they missed some notes or they didn't understand a concept. Because without having anyone else in the class, you're then forced to have to go straight to the professor, which is great to go to the professor when needed. And I encourage that. But I don't think it's an and, or it should be a both. They should have a group, and they should also be able to approach the professor or the TA. So when they're learning how to study, you have to figure out what way works best for that student. Do they do better in a library that has no sound? Do they do better studying in a public space where there's lots of background noise? Do they do well in their room at a desk? I don't like it when students are studying on their bed. Now, some of them will anyway, but I find that a lot of times they fall asleep. I also encourage students to not have their phones right next to them, or if they do, flip them over, because they might have their phone with them because they're listening to music and they might study better with music. But I don't want them to see all the texts that come in while they're doing their designated study time, because it just derails them and can be very distracting for kids who don't have ADHD or ADD. So pretty much for all students, I really don't have an exception for that. The texting that comes in is distracting.
Yeah, for sure. We can all attest to that. So it sounds like having an executive function coach that specifically works with college students is almost like an accountability, because kids have had their parent there in the past as their support mechanism. Why does an executive function coach often work better than a parent?
I think because we're not their parent, it comes across not the same. It's like the investment of time and interest is not the same as what the parents invested in that child. And so they're able to maybe be a little more transparent in some ways. Like, yes, I didn't get this done because I was up until 4 a.m. playing video games. Or honestly, I didn't do my work. I watched YouTube videos or TikTok, or I hung out with my friends, or we went and played flag football. Like, they're more likely to tell you what they were doing instead. Whereas I think sometimes, and I'm a parent of 3 kids in their 20s who've all graduated from college, sometimes they're like, oh yeah, I did that. but maybe they did and maybe they didn't. And so as a coach, they're more likely to tell us what they're actually doing with their time so we can like work with them. Because I'll say, hey, I have a college degree and I'm not paying for your schooling. So you not telling me something that's going on only hurts you. It doesn't hurt me. And then we're like, oh, okay, you're here to help me. And I think that's the key.
Yes, for sure. You talked a little bit about the role of students going to their TA, going to their professor. Self-advocacy is really important in college. One of the things we often encourage kids to do before they even start classes, right when they get on campus, is to seek out the Learning Center. Can you share a little bit about what the Learning Center can provide in addition to other services the student may be able to get?
Yes, I will start by saying I believe that everybody, students and adults alike, needs an editor. Everyone needs an editor to look over their work before they turn in a large document or paper. So if your school, which they all do, offers an opportunity for someone to help you, especially if you're not super strong in writing, to help you look over your writing or organize your writing, take advantage of that. It's part of what you pay for tuition. You're paying, or your parents are paying, a whole lot of money for you to attend this school, and that is included. So I always use the line Tan Stoffel, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. What this stuff is not free services. It's included. You're already paying for it. Use what you're paying for. If you need a tutor for your math or your computer science or your biology lab or your English paper, use the tutoring services. If you have accommodations, use the accommodations. They're there to support you so that you will succeed. No one says when you graduate college, oh, did you have accommodations so you had a longer test time? Or did you have accommodations so that if you got sick because you have a chronic illness, that we were able to give you grace on when you took your test or when a paper was due? No, no one ever says that. They go, oh, you graduated, great. But use the accommodations. And I know some students feel embarrassed to ask for accommodations or to admit that they might need a little assistance in an area. But if it's already been proven that this would help you succeed, we want you to succeed. We don't want you to feel embarrassed that you might need something different to help you to be the best student academically you can be, and also feel emotionally well while you're going through school. 8 semesters is a long time to go through school without the help you need.
For sure. And I've seen that a lot over the years, that kids will have accommodations in high school. They'll have extra time, maybe they have time and a half or double time. There's a whole host of accommodations. And then when they go up to college, they think, well, I did okay in high school. I won't ask for these accommodations in college. But my experience has been that you want to ask because they're even more valuable in college.
A fun fact that a lot of people don't know is one of my children had a chronic illness and she just really had trouble getting up super early. And the doctor wrote an accommodation for her that the university honored, which was that she would not have 8 a.m. classes because she could not handle getting up that early and functioning. And so there may be somebody out there that has a chronic illness that really needs that specific accommodation. And there's a way to make it work between your doctor and the accommodations office. And some universities make the student go and pick up physical letters and turn them into their professors. And we need to encourage the students to do that because I think that it's easier to do it digitally and have it sent to them than have them walk up to the professor and kind of hand them this letter. But either way, the professor will accommodate if they know that that's something that the student needs. And some universities will allow early scheduling. And so they'll give them priority scheduling. My goodness, that is worth gold. I don't know anybody who wouldn't want early accommodation for scheduling.
Yes, for sure. That would be amazing for sure. Suzan, thank you for that on accommodation. So if we can help your child in college with an executive function coach, such as Suzan or somebody else on our team, we'd love to talk to you. You can take a second to scan the QR code and it will go right to our page so that you can learn more about our services. So Suzan, I know you want to talk about a couple of students that had unique situations. Let's start out with John.
Okay, so John, which is not his real name, we're not using real names in this. John was a freshman at the University of Chicago this past year. And the University of Chicago is one of the few schools left in this country that still functions on the quarter system, which means all classes are 10 weeks long and then finals. And they start later in September and they do their fall quarter. And then in the spring, they have the winter quarter or the early spring quarter, and then the later spring quarter, which tends to fall after spring break. And so they don't take 5 classes. They generally take 4 classes. And sometimes there's a 4th quarter in the summer. They can take a class in the summer if need be. So this student went in wanting to be a computer science major, and fall semester, 2 things happened. One, he did not love the computer science classes and they were just not a good fit for him. And 2, he got sick. When your freshmen get sick, they can get quite ill and it can derail them, especially if you have a 10-week course instead of a 15-week course. It's harder to catch up if you miss a week or 2 weeks. So we figured out when his drop date was and made sure that he dropped a class before he would receive a not great grade in that class. So, and that's an area where I worked with him and his parents so that they were aware, because it's important to touch base with parents when you're taking away classes from freshmen. And then another thing we did was we talked about office hours and syllabuses and getting the book materials. This particular young man had no idea how to do any of that. So then it was something that when we went into the winter quarter, we revisited all of that. By the time he got to the spring semester, the 3rd of his quarters, he knew. He's like, Suzan, I know. We need to look at the syllabus ahead of time. We need to order the books, and I need actual physical books because I do better with them. And then another area for this particular young man was that he did have something he needed to have added to his computer and had to figure out how to go to office hours and how to have help adding this to his computer so he could successfully turn in his projects. He did also learn how to make appointments for office hours. So by the time he got to the end of freshman year, he was a little short in credits because of having been sick and dropping classes. We figured out what class he would take over the summer, and he's heading back to school next month as a sophomore, completely caught up.
That's awesome. I bet that felt great, that he was back on track, because getting sick is so common. Every parent can attest to the fact that that is, almost always happens when kids
usually you can plan that they will get sick. It's not if they get sick, they generally get sick with something. And also the other thing I wanted to mention for this young man is he did change his major as well, because he's a kid who went in there because he liked playing video games. He thought he would want to design video games. Well, it turns out he's really, really great at writing and loves fiction writing and creative writing. So he may be a famous writer one day, or a screenwriter, and we get to go watch one of his movies one day. I don't know.
And then you can say you're a part of his life. That's pretty cool. All right. So let's take Brad. Brad transitioned to Notre Dame.
Yes. So Brad was a sophomore when I started with him. He was an architecture major, and there were a couple things that we had to work on. Architecture students have an incredible amount of lab work that they have to do. And so his lab was 20 minutes away from his dorm. And we had to figure out, like, what are his hours he's going to lab and what time is he getting back? And he was getting back at like 2 a.m. And I'm like, okay, how are you getting home? I'm walking. Well, maybe we come up with something else. So he started using a skateboard. But then a skateboard got lost, a skateboard got stolen, got to keep track of the skateboards. And how do you help the student to plan out how to not lose their stuff? And I will tell you, this is just on the side, a lot of the big schools, kids ride bikes. And if you don't remember where you parked your bike, you might as well have had it stolen, because you'll never find it. And if you don't use the U-lock, and it's a very specific lock, the bikes will get stolen. And I have had a child have their bike stolen. So it's kind of a really disappointing thing when your kid walks out and goes, it's 2 a.m, I'm trying to get back home, and where'd my bike go? So I think logistically, knowing how to help a certain student get back and forth is a big deal, because that can derail them. Another thing for this student that would derail him is his AirPods. If his AirPods were, he had to study with them. When he got back really late, if he left them in his pocket of his jeans, they weren't charged. And then he might leave the next day for class either without them or with uncharged AirPods and maybe not know what the case was. So we had to talk about simple things like the AirPods you need to build routines in. They need to get put in the case, and the case needs to be put here every single night. It takes like 30 days to build new routines. So this particular young man needed new routines so that he could succeed. And he was also not eating consistently. So one of the things that really helped was figuring out getting him to study in places where he could get food was really helpful. So it wasn't that he couldn't do the work. He needed someone to guide him to make his life function so that he could be successful in his work. And he also was a student that he decided he wanted to go to law school, and he really wanted to do something different than architecture. So when he went over Christmas, he talked to his parents, and then he was able to pivot his major. And this summer, he went down every single day with his dad, and he was on Capitol Hill all summer.
That's really cool. That's a great ending. Thanks for sharing that, Susan. And we're happy to help. If you would like more information on our services, or you would like to talk to one of our program managers, you can scan this QR code, and we are happy to support you. So Susan, thank you so much for lending your insight today and for sharing strategies on how to help kids transition to college, and once they're there, how to be successful. It was a pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you for having me.
And I wish everybody out there a wonderful start to the school year. Have a great day. Bye-bye.